Good morning. Honorable professors, dear colleagues, dear participants. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the inauguration of Child Research and Education Congress, organized by the Institute of Pedagogy at the University of Rzeszów. I thank you for your presence in this momentous day, full of exchange of knowledge and experience on child development and education. This unique event is held in a prestigious location at the University of Rzeszów, which is the largest university in southeastern Poland. Thanks to the support of the Ministry of Education and Science and the Doskonała Nauka program, which means excellent science, we have the opportunity to gather in this beautiful main hall to discuss and share knowledge together. The topics of our Congress are both interdisciplinary and current. We will focus on the analysis educational systems, the role of the media in education, psychological aspects of children's functioning, as well as the evolution of the task function facing education. We will also discuss the impact of art education on child development and the impact of early childhood environments. It is an honor to be part of this remarkable initiative. I believe that our discussions, exchange of experiences, and the resulting conclusions will contribute to the development of child sciences and education. We have 2 days ahead of us full of inspiring presentations, intense discussions, and fruitful meetings. In a special way, I would like to welcome and thank for this place to the authorities of the university, in particular Rector Professor Sylwester Czopek, and Vice Rector of the College of Social Sciences, Professor Elżbieta Feret. I'm honored to please Professor Feret to make an official opening of this Congress.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say that I am very proud because I am the Vice Rector of Social Science College Social Sciences. I am proud that a lot of people from abroad, from Poland, wanted to come to our university. It is a great honor, and I would like to say that behave on my own, on behalf of Professor Sylwester Czopek, Rector of our university. We are very grateful that so many people wanted to come to our university. We want to be the open university, open for the new subjects, topics, and I think in this moment, this topic is the main. And we need a lot of talks about this subject, about this topic. We know that pandemic, it wasn't good time for everybody, so I think that the position of the child is especially, we have to focus on this position for the children. I would like to say that in my college, we have a lot of researchers, but now I can see that we can collaborate with other universities in Poland and abroad. Special thanks I would like to say for Mrs. Mariola Kinal and all the other committee organizers who prepared this Congress. 2 days. 2 days you will have the possibility to hear a lot of new ideas, I think, and besides of that, and maybe the most important, is to talk. I think that we should to talk. we should to find new ways because of the new situation that we are in now. Thank you very much, and once again, thank you that you want to participate in our Congress. Thank you. I wish you fruitful deliberation. Thank you very much.
Of course, some technical problems. Okay, I will be continuing. So at this moment, I'm also sending grateful words to Professor Ryszard Pęczkowski, Director of the Institute of Pedagogy. Thank you very much. I hope you will enjoy participating in our event. The first day of the Congress will bring us the lecture from renowned experts in pedagogy and child development sciences. The first part, the opening lectures, will feature prominent researchers from Belgium, the Netherlands, Portugal, Greece, Turkey, and Bulgaria. The Congress will be inaugurated with a lecture by Professor Idesbald Nicaise from Catholic University Leuven. Professor Nicaise specializes in comparative and longitudinal research on segregation in schools and at the system level. His work focuses on strategies to reduce educational and social inequalities. After the Professor Nicaise will be a lecture delivered by Professor Paul Lesseman with collaboration with Dr. Paulina Slot and Dr. Olga Wysłowska. Professor Lesseman is a well-known expert of the psychological well-being of refugee mothers from Ukraine and their preschool children in Poland. Dr. Slot and Dr. Wysłowska are working with Professor Lesseman on the SPINKA project, focusing on educational integration and psychological support of refugee children. The next speaker, Professor Nilufer Pambetsioglu of Istanbul University, focuses on creativity, identity, and alienation in the context of the child and the arts in her presentation. Her research looks at the impact of art education on children's development. Professor Dimitris Zachos of Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and Dr. Konstantinos Antinos Angelopoulos will discuss the impact of the political climate on everyday educational life with a particular focus on teachers' attitudes and practices toward multicultural and intercultural education. The next speaker, Professor Fernando Albuquerque Costa of University of Lisbon and his team will talk about the Escola Digital project, which describes experiences with the use of technology in primary education in Portugal. Then Professor Despina Karakatsani will discuss the regulation of the child and morbid emotion in Greek pedagogical discourse of the interwar period 1911-1939. And in the final talk, Professor Dimitrina Kamenova will present the issue of how the educational environment affects the harmonious development of the child. Each of them will bring unique insights and deep understanding of topic, which will undoubtedly enrich our deliberation. Let me give a floor to Professor Idesbald Nicaise from Catholic University Leuven and his lecture.
screen, it's okay. Yeah. Dear Ms. Vice Rector, dear Chair, Dr. Kinal, dear Mariola, dear colleagues and friends also online, thanks for having me here. My talk will be about fighting segregation in schools and at systems level in education. For a long time, I have been examining together with PhD students and other researchers the impact of system characteristics on educational inequities across countries through comparative research using large-scale international test databases, but also some longitudinal research. And this research is still ongoing. I will not go into technical details because we are people from various disciplines, but I'll try to give you a flavor of the main insights that we have gathered so far on the impact of segregation. Now I need to... The slides advances on my screen, but not on the big screen. I'm sorry. Do you use this? Okay, yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. So let me start by defining how we understand segregation. Segregation, I will distinguish between academic segregation and social segregation, although both types of segregation go hand in hand in practice. When we speak about academic segregation, we refer to modes of practice where students are being put in different groups and on different tracks, depending mainly on their academic achievement. So people who are deemed less able in mathematics will be put on a different track than people who are bright in mathematics, based on their scores on tests in mathematics. That's academic segregation. Whereas social segregation is different treatment of students, of people, based on their socioeconomic background. This sounds very surprising and discriminatory. In practice, it happens, it still happens, sometimes deliberately, but most often indeliberately, unconsciously. But de facto, behind academic segregation, we see that the outcome is very much social segregation as well. So I will examine how these concepts are interrelated and how these result in inequities in educational outcomes. There is part of a story which is very, very commonly known. People from different socioeconomic backgrounds access education, say in kindergarten or in primary school, with different amounts of material comfort, different amounts of human capital in their home environment. Think of the education level of parents, which is a very strong determinant of the school careers and the success at school with children. Different amounts of social capital, of support, of access to services, etc. All these differences in socioeconomic background result in unequal performance of children from the very beginning of primary school, say. And these unequal outcomes then result in academic segregation, mainly by the end of primary school and certainly within secondary, but also to some extent from the very start of the education career, as you will see within a minute. So this tendency of education systems to sort students into different tracks is a practice that unconsciously reproduces social segregation. because the academic outcomes of children are determined by their social background. And that social segregation then in turn reinforces unequal educational outcomes. And it is that part of the story highlighted in the dark blue arrows that I will examine into greater detail. There are many, many ways in which academic segregation and social segregation reinforce social inequalities. First of all, at student level, students who are not performing very well and who are put in classes with peers that do not perform very well miss the support and the challenge and the feedback from peers that are more successful at school. So there are negative peer effects, if you like. Disadvantaged students do not benefit from the support and the challenge of their more successful peers. There are psychological effects. Students feel that they are put on a, say, less valued track and therefore get demotivated and discouraged and start performing less well. And if this happens collectively in classes, then you get a sort of aversion to school in classes. In some tracks in education, it is very hard for teachers to manage discipline, etc., because the students start getting fed up with school and completely disenchanted. This is the student level. There are mechanisms at the teacher level. First of all, the famous Matthew effect. If teachers are allowed to teach in any school, obviously the most brilliant teachers will be attracted by the strongest schools, because there they get rewarded for their efforts. It is satisfying, it's more comfortable also for them, and brilliant teachers have many, many alternatives from which they can choose. So the good teachers will select good schools and vice versa. That's Matthew effects. And say the more, say, disadvantaged schools are left with less brilliant teachers. There are also expectation effects. Teachers teaching in disadvantaged classes or schools will lower their expectation level, and by the mere fact of lowering their expectations also, say, stimulate less well the efforts of students. There are mechanisms at school level, namely the fact that that schools to some extent compete with each other, especially in systems where there is free school choice. It's not the case in all countries, but to the extent that there is free school choice, there is a tendency for stronger schools to attract stronger students, stronger parents also, and indirectly, even if schools are subsidized on the same footing by the public government, you observe that differences are growing between those schools due to the community of parents that is different, the support that one gets also from enterprises, etc., is different. So schools also have their social capital, if you like. And then finally, there are mechanisms at system level. We know very well that some tracks, especially at secondary level, are more demanding than others. And this systematic, deliberate policy of putting students into different tracks, especially when you do that at an early age, that tends to reinforce the inequalities in performance of students. It has to do not with the capability of students, to some extent it has to do with capability of students, but it has to do with the opportunity to learn. In tracks that are less demanding, the expectations from students are lower, they are less stimulated, they get less support, and indirectly they perform less well. So all these mechanisms together produce a school effect that is extremely important. It was discovered by the OECD in the famous PISA studies, but also by other researchers, including ourselves, that actually the collective say, degree of disadvantage at school level has a stronger impact on student outcomes than the individual social background of students. What you see here is a graph representing the average performance of disadvantaged, intermediate, and wealthy students from left to right in disadvantaged, intermediate, and wealthy schools from the bottom to the top. So the bottom curve relates to students from disadvantaged backgrounds who respectively go to disadvantaged schools, intermediate schools, mixed schools, or elite schools, if you like. And the top curve relates to wealthy students from wealthy backgrounds who go respectively from left to right to disadvantaged school, a mixed school, and an elite school. And what we see is that a disadvantaged student at the bottom right corner of the graph, a disadvantaged student in a wealthy school, in a privileged school, does better than wealthy students from an elite background in a disadvantaged school. In other words, the school matters more for your performance than your own social background. We're speaking about social segregation here. This is a strong, consistent pattern that we observe in many, many countries. And we know why. Here again, you see a correlation at country level between, at the bottom of the graph, academic or social segregation on the left-hand side, academic segregation at the right-hand side, from left to right, and in the vertical dimension, you see the social inequalities in outcomes. And for the interest of the audience, I compared my own country, namely the Flemish region, because in Belgium, the education sector is decentralized to the community level, the Flemish community and the French-speaking community. So I compare Flanders with Poland, if you like. Poland is doing better in terms of segregation, both academic and social segregation, than Flanders, and Poland also has less social inequality in outcomes than Flanders. And overall, you see quite some correlation between the degree of segregation, be it academic or social, and the degree of inequity between countries. The next slide gives you a sort of alternative measure and ranking of countries based on that extended notion of social disadvantage or social determination. As most people know, in PISA, at OECD, one uses the determination coefficient of linear regression analysis as an indicator of social inequality. The dependent variable is the test score of students. The independent variable is the composite indicator of socioeconomic background, and the degree to which the socioeconomic background of a student determines the outcome in terms of tests scores is used as a measure of social inequality in a country. Now, this standard OECD measure has two shortcomings. It looks only at socioeconomic background. It does not look at migration background. And second, it looks only at the individual level. It doesn't look at the school level. What we did is calculate an alternative indicator of social determination, which takes on board both the socioeconomic and the migration background of students at the individual level and at the collective level, at the school level. And what we end up with is a far more gloomy picture, say, of social inequality, especially in countries like Belgium, the Netherlands. My country, again, is the champion, unfortunately, within the European Union in terms of social inequity. We arrive at an R square of 40%, whereas the OECD indicator reaches barely 18% for Belgium, for Flanders. For Poland, there is no big difference between the OECD indicator and our indicator. Poland is situated at the right-hand side of the scale. So good news for Poland again. Now I want to discuss 4 key mechanisms. I will have to rush due to time pressure through these 4 key mechanisms in which segregation operates in practice in most countries. Free school choice in the first place, separate systems of special education in second place, grade repetition or ability grouping in the third place, and the cascade effect or the early tracking at a secondary level in the fourth place. For all of these 4 mechanisms, we found evidence in the literature and through our own research, first of all, that practices are very, very different between countries. So that means there's no law of nature that there should be a certain percentage of pupils, for example, in special education. There are extreme differences between countries. Second, these practices are very much socially biased. There is, for each of these 4 types of segregation, a relatively strong correlation between the practice of, say, repeating a grade or early tracking and the social background of children. Thirdly, we know increasingly from longitudinal research that each of these mechanisms tend on average to have the opposite of the expected effect, namely that students perform less well in the longer term when they are referred to, say, special education, when they have repeated a grade, when they are moved into a lower track at early ages in secondary school, etc. So all in all, these mechanisms do contribute to social inequality at the end of the education cycle. And what is maybe equally important to mention, but it's not a topic of my presentation today, is that these mechanisms do not contribute really to a better average performance of education systems. Sometimes, for example, early tracking is advocated because it would enhance the efficiency of education and therefore produce better average outcomes. Now we can demonstrate that it's not the case. Starting with free school choice, we know the story. I hope most of you are aware of the story of the occurrence of quasi-markets in education, where schools, if there is free school choice and freedom of erection of schools, that schools start competing with each other, parents compete with each other for the best schools, and obviously the most wealthy parents are the better off, they are better informed, they are more mobile, they choose the best schools, they are the first to select the school for their students, for their children, whereas disadvantaged parents are unable to bring their children many kilometers away from the home, etc. So the operation of free school choice tends to reinforce social segregation in schools. It is counterintuitive because one would expect that if there is free school choice, that also disadvantaged parents would opt for the better schools for their children, and therefore the poor schools would be eliminated from the market. This does not happen because the market is not, a very clear market with mobility and with perfect information, etc. So in practice, it reinforces inequalities. I give some examples and some references to the literature on the slide, but I will not go into detail. Second mechanism, special education. Here again, we see that there are gray areas between, what we call, innate disabilities of students on the one hand, and so-called social disabilities or socially determinant disadvantages. For example, slight cognitive retardation. What is the origin of slight cognitive retardation? It can have to do with a lower IQ, with genetic differences in abilities, but it can be related also to social background. And to a large extent, it does. For example, in my region, there is a special type of special education for what we call slightly cognitively retarded children. 80% of these children in that type of school come from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. And this is just one way in which disadvantaged children end up in special education where they do not belong. Other factors have to do with behavioral disorders or learning disorders which are not always very objectively established. The graph here gives you the example of the other part of our country where we have a very nice table showing the differences in the risk of being in special education by socioeconomic background. The population of students is subdivided in 10 deciles, 10 times 10% of the student population. At the left-hand side, decile 1 are the poorest 10% of students. The decile 10 refers to the richest 10% of students. And you see enormous differences in the risk of being in special education at secondary level at the age of 15. Okay, here again, we have evidence that referrals to special education, especially in primary school, in the longer term, on average, I should not say for all students, but on average, for the average student, that referral to special education is counterproductive in the longer term. That students who are identical, this was examined through, say, matched pairs of students, with so-called, how is it called again? The technical term escapes me now. Propensity score matching. Students are put into pairs, and one student is referred to special education, the other not, although they have identical profiles. And after a few years, we see that the student who was not referred to special education is doing better, both in cognitive terms and in terms of well-being. So the lesson here is that we should go for inclusive education also for social reasons. This graph here shows differences in practices. And here again, my country stands out as maybe a world champion in a segregated special education. Flanders is the extreme left country here. And again, Poland is doing far better in terms of the proportion of children outside mainstream education, i.e. in segregated special. I turn to grade repetition. Grade repetition, same story. It occurs to different extents in different countries. We will see another graph immediately. But it is correlated with social disadvantage. For example, on top of the graph, you see Greece. In Greece, a student from a socially disadvantaged background has 4.5 times more risk to end up to repeat a grade than the average student in the country, 4.5 times more. In Belgium, it is 1.5 times more. It is not too bad, but the practice is much more frequent in Belgium. So here again, our country stands out as a bad example. In Poland, you also have a substantial socioeconomic bias, although it does not seem to be statistically very significant. Deserves further investigation. This graph here shows the differences in practice, and you see that Belgium, but also the Netherlands, for example, Austria, and some other countries use grade repetition very extensively as a method of segregating. The lesson here is that, again, from longitudinal research, we know that grade repetition for the average person affected by grade repetition, that in the longer term, this person will perform less well than the person who moves on without grade repetition, after controlling for other differences. So again, grade repetition is counterproductive, and this reinforces social disadvantage. Finally, early tracking. There's much more to say about early tracking. I summarize here the arguments of the proponents of early tracking, those defending the system. So I hope everybody knows in the room what early tracking means. It means that you orient students to different tracks in secondary education at an early age, say before age 14, whereas in the vast majority of countries, tracking occurs at age 16. Now, early tracking is advocated because it would allow the stronger young people to shine, because they are more challenged through, say, a more demanding type of track. It would also induce less failure of the less able students, and therefore foster a smooth school career, and in the end it would result in higher average performance. Those are the theoretical arguments of the proponents. There are also arguments relating to the labor market outcomes. There would be a better matching between education and the labor market in systems where early tracking is used. Now, empirical research demonstrates the opposite. The research findings show that premature orientation leads to very a lot of misallocation of students. At the age of 11, 12, 13 years old, students don't know what is most interesting for them. They have seen very little of the real world, both in terms of educational tracks and in terms of vocational futures for themselves. So de facto, it is parents and teachers who decide for them. And both parents and teachers decide on, say, mainly socially determined arguments. So there's a lot of misallocation resulting in a stronger social bias in the tracking of students, and that in turn results in more failure, more discouragement, and less good performance, both at individual and at collective level. And in terms of labor market outcomes, it results in, say, in some aversion towards the so-called STEM education, because science technology is seen as a sort of second-order choice. The languages and cultural and abstract mathematical orientations are seen as the top of the ladder. So students in early tracking system tend to opt disproportionately for the more academic tracks and are not very keen to choose for STEM orientations, etc. I need to stop. I'll just show you the results in terms of very complex statistical analysis that we did, combining data sets from different sources. I will not go into detail, but what it shows is that on average, early tracking before age 14 results in lower average performance in the countries that practice it. And moreover, if you look at students in different quantiles of the distribution, say, for example, the red bars at the left-hand side in every column, those are the students, around 5% of the distribution by ability. The weakest students suffer most from early tracking. Okay, this was an overview in a rush of the, harmful effects of all types of segregation. what we need is pulling down walls between different tracks in education, special and mainstream, between different academic and vocational tracks, etc. Introducing more flexible curricula, introducing more individualized support, more differentiation, offering more support and believing in students in the first place rather than, using education as a sorting machine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your inspiring speech. And now I will ask to the stage Professor Paul Reseman, Dr. Pauline Slot, and Dr. Olga Wysłowska. This one, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here at this wonderful institute in this wonderful city. And I try to go quickly through my presentation, which concerns the psychological well-being of Ukrainian refugee mothers spread across the country, Poland country, since the start of Russia's war on Ukraine. The context is clear. I hope it shifts. No, I have to do it here. Yeah. Right. So close to 1 million Ukrainian refugee mothers and their children, mostly in the pre or primary school age, have resettled in Poland, and they face a number of challenges. They have to cope with trauma. Often they experience severe violence and the things of war. They lost property, they lost beloved ones. They are quite uncertain about what will bring the future. Mothers in particular have to worry about how to ensure that your children's development is going to be optimal, how to socialize them, how to realize education for them. Adaptation to the new context, how to deal with financial struggles, with housing, with setting up a social network. These are big challenges. One of, and in many countries where Ukrainian refugees have resettled, lots of initiatives are taken, but especially also in Poland, there are a number of initiatives to deal with that, to support young mothers, young children, to ensure education and care, and to create social support opportunities. And the Spinka project, on which this presentation is based, is one of these initiatives. It provides preschool education and care program for children. It is also community building is central in this project, offering social support for mothers, offering them also opportunities to find a job, improve their financial situation. The Spinka project provides a multilingual program to prepare children for a primary school, which could be either in Poland, if this refugee situation continues, or in Ukraine when they can be returned back. Today I will present a bit on the so-called pre-intervention data, just data that were collected at the beginning or before that the children started in the Spinka preschool programs. A follow-up is going on, and I hope that we will be able to present on the follow-up in a few months when there is another conference in Poland on early childhood education, which will be in Warsaw from 10 to 12 July. I will return to that later. So this is an impression of how such Spinka preschool center looks like. This one is in Katowice. You see the materials. We didn't photograph children, of course. That is not allowed anymore. You can also see, in the, for instance, in the left, the part left down, that there is material, reading materials in two languages, Polish and Ukrainian language. And this is, I think, a particular strong characteristic of the Spinka program. So let's talk about psychological well-being. How does the refugee situation impact on well-being? The literature on this is mixed. A very famous review by Vazel and colleagues, published in The Lancet, reports a prevalence of about 5 to 9% of clinical symptoms of major depression and also post-traumatic stress disorder. That doesn't seem that much if you compare that to a general population. However, this review also shows there is a wide variation by refugee group, by country of resettlement, and also by research methods. Other studies, studies among referred Bosnian and North Korean refugees, show much higher prevalence of psychiatric symptoms. And recently here in Poland, UNICEF conducted a survey among Ukrainian mothers using the WHO well-being index, and found that about 60% of the mothers report high levels of distress, and 53% of them considered to seek professional help for this. So, what is the state of affairs? That was one of our research questions, but in addition to that, we also wanted to know what are possible personal and contextual factors that might influence how the coping processes of the mothers go and how that affects psychological well-being. So this is our method. We conducted a survey among 643 Ukrainian mothers of preschool children who applied for a place in the Spinka Center. These Spinka centers were located in 26 municipalities, and this resulted in a so-called nested data set, and I will report a bit on that later. So parents were nested within municipalities. We used a questionnaire with short forms of standard, widely used screening instruments of, for instance, depressive mood, which is the CESD, the Center for Epidemiological Studies Depression Scale. Another one is the satisfaction with life, which was based on the ISOTUS project, the parenting stress scale, and the child emotional and behavioral adjustment scale. In addition, we also asked about financial well-being, the housing situation, demographic background characteristics, child-rearing beliefs, and the future plans of the parents. So here are the results. This is based on the CESD, so the depressive mood scale. I hope you can see the pictures. I hope it's readable from this distance. The first graph on the left side of this slide shows the percentage of Ukrainian mothers who scored above the clinical cutoff threshold of 16, which is the commonly applied clinical threshold. And a score of 16 or larger on the CESD indicates moderate to major depression. And as the graph shows, more than 50% of the Ukrainian refugee mothers reported moderate to severe major stress. To anchor this finding, we conducted a systematic review of the literature on using this scale in different populations. For instance, general populations in Central and Eastern European countries, but also in other European countries and in countries outside Europe. And you can see that the score of the Ukrainian mothers in the Spinka sample is much higher than in these comparison groups. I will not talk about the graph below because that is not based on the clinical cutoff, but just the mean score. This is a more difficult story. I will skip that to save time. Here are the results for parenting stress and also for life satisfaction. The upper graph is on parenting stress. Parenting stress of the Ukrainian mothers reported on this parenting stress scale was compared with a number of samples from single and multi-country studies, and the number of participants in these studies was more than 8,000. And you can see that on a standardized scale, so we have standardized these scores, the difference between, for instance, the level of stress reported by the Spinka mothers compared to the level of stress reported by informants in the general population in European countries is about one standard deviation, which is a huge difference. Satisfaction with life was based on a scale used in the multi-country study ISOTUS, funded by the European Union. And so this allowed us to compare the satisfaction with life score of the Ukrainian refugee mothers with those of parents in other European countries, parents of low-income households, low-income parents in Poland, and also immigrant and ethnic minority parents in other European countries. And once again, you can see from the graph that the Spinka mothers report much less satisfaction of life compared to these other samples. It's about 0.7 standard deviation lower. So, how can we predict these psychological well-being scores? This is a list of predictors that we use, personal predictors, contextual predictors. I'm not going to going into this in detail, but you can see, for instance, one of the predictors that we used was child emotional and behavioral adjustment, which was measured on a scale running from 1 to 5 and had a mean score of above 4. And the interpretation of this mean score is that on average, the parents reported that the children behaves well, is well adjusted, emotionally and behaviorally well adjusted. That's good news. You can also see that the standard deviation, the SD, is relatively small, so it's not like a widely spread. Yet, there are children who are not very well adjusted, and I will say something more about that later. You can see that the financial well-being situation is evaluated on average as not very satisfying, somewhat satisfying maybe. Because the data of the parents were nested within municipalities, and we did indeed found that there is a difference between municipalities. So, for instance, in the depressive mood and parenting stress scales, we found that there is relevant, significant variance at the municipal level, which means that the average level of these indicators, when you have accounted for all the individual differences, so the differences between the models within the municipalities, is still, so there is an effect of the municipality. And it could point to the effects of local policies regarding the refugee models. And we found, for instance, that regarding financial well-being and also the evaluation of the housing situations, there was also relevant variance at the municipal level. So we built our models. We built in some theoretical assumptions on the relationships between the well-being indicators, and we then estimated full models with all predictors included, and then next steps, we eliminated the non-significant predictive effects in the models. So this is what you can find. Don't worry about this graph. It's very complex, as you can see. You can see a lot of arrows in these models at two levels. The within level, so this is, let's say, the individual parent level, and the between level, which is the level of the municipalities. Don't bother about the details. You can see that some of the paths, some of the arrows are in bold, and others are dotted lines. The dotted lines are tested, but found insignificant effects in this model. So what is the upshot? Let me summarize. Ukrainian refugee models show on average low to very low psychological well-being compared to the general population. And this is in line with the findings of the UNICEF report. We find in our predictive analysis that depressive mood is mainly predicted by parenting stress and by financial worries. Parenting stress, in turn, is mainly predicted by the children's behavioral adjustment, but also by financial worries. Children's behavioral adjustment is positively predicted by a satisfying housing situation and by progressive child-centered parenting beliefs. There are differences between municipalities, and they probably relate to the financial support policies and the housing support policies at the municipal level. So there's a lot of more to say, but this is roughly what comes out of these complex multi-level analysis. There are a number of limitations. I will not detail them here, but it has to do with the assessment instruments that we use. We use short forms, so there is higher likelihoods that there is measurement error in these short forms. We reviewed a number of comparison studies. You can always find more studies, so it might yield a different picture, but I don't think so. The design is cross-sectional. Everything was measured at the same time, so we cannot draw strong conclusions about causal relations. And the sample, of course, is only representative for the models who applied to the SPINCA program, and not for models who didn't. So, and in future analysis, we should include more contextual predictors, especially also predictors that have to do with experiences with the people left, who are left behind in Ukraine and the social network of the models. So, to conclude, the psychological well-being of Ukrainian refugee mothers with young children should be a major concern, because enhanced levels of stress and depression are major risks for both mothers and children's development in long term. The children seem to adjust emotionally and behaviorally rather well to the situation. If they don't, and there are children who don't, it's a major risk factor for mothers' well-being, especially via the root parenting stress. Programs like SPINCA are essential to support child development and adjustment, and also to provide mothers with a supportive community and to help them with housing and finance. Housing and finance were the contextual predictors that stood out in this analysis as very important for the psychological well-being. Personal characteristics like age, education level, number of children were less relevant than these policy relevant fields like housing and financial support. Thank you for attending. Here are some acknowledgements I would like to mention, supporting us in this research, and I would once again like to notify that there will be a conference on early childhood education and development in Warsaw from 10 to 12 July. So please be welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, due to personal reason, Professor Nilufer Pambetsioglu couldn't be with us personally today, but we have opportunity to listen her lecture online. So now I will try to connect with her. I hope that everything will work. Hello.
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me and see me. Is there any problem?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, now I will try to share my file with you. Where is it? It's on the desktop, but my topic will be identity, creativity, and alienation. And when these three topics come together, it's a disaster. And when we add children into that, it would be even worse. So I don't know how to add or let me see. Do you see my file?
No, not yet. And I guess you have it now. No, now it's working.
So, in the context of a child is a complex thing, and he is growing, or she is growing, and then she is learning new things, and then we are trying to learn from the child. And when the art forms come into the discussion, it's much more complex. So we will be discussing all these issues, but in a very smooth way. Believe me, you will not notice that it's that much complex. So when the child is learning, in fact, he is creating himself once again, every minute, every second, because on the way of learning, he is doing his best or her best to see the things in many different ways. Sometimes you see children playing on the ground. They play with the same toy again and again in the same way. They handle it and they take care of it. They turn it up and down, and then they learn new things on their own. So loneliness is a part of being child. And because the child could only decipher himself or understand his potential by being alone. Of course, later on, we see that children learn from each other, from their parents, from their school, from books, and then comes to the end, internet, the digital media, and the social networks, etc. So children's consumptions are really very important because, you know, there is a term called to be, you are what you eat. So the children are consuming everything around in the form of knowledge, of course, not food only. But when they see art, they can create art. When they hear music, they can create their own music. So encountering with the art forms and different types of art forms would also contribute to the child to create his own forms as well. So it's kind of a dilemma. That means that we need to expose our children to as many artistic forms as possible, as we may say. But when it comes to production, I mean, when we ask the children to produce their own art, many of those are hesitant to share their creative thoughts and innovations due to the fact that they are somehow concerned about what the others might reflect on them or how would they react to them. So they would not be ready to share it in the first minutes. That means the artistic presentation and production would take some time, a process, as we might call. This study was motivated by the experience of writing a story after taking part in art and aesthetic sessions with elementary school pupils in an underprivileged area. Because their handwriting was bad and they need to write more. It was the physical conditions that forced them to take care of their writing skills. But later on, we concentrated more on the creative writing forms because my topic was just media literacy, what they consume and what they produce, and are they related with each other? This was my point of view primarily. So there seems to be many similarities between what kids experience in the real world, what they consume, how many different stories they hear every day, and the ones they create, the virtual ones they create. I call the word virtual because it's not there at that moment. You make it concrete when you work on it. So the research findings indicate that children's loneliness, alienation, and identity issues were reflected in their narratives. Of course, it's a kind of a long research, but I will let you know about it on a very tiny little research finding. Youngsters especially lack understanding and context for what art is. So they don't know if they are producing arts or not. So how can you classify them? There's no classification as children's art, etc. So they don't accept it because art is somewhat much more global. A piece of art can occasionally be shaped by the options provided by an art environment, the family's mindset, and the standards of aesthetic taste established by the culture. So the child needs to know all about these. And there may be some differences between the child's genuine imagination and what he can imagine regarding the artwork. Perhaps he creates something which might be very genuine, original, but then he hates it and then throws it to the garbage. So the child's unforeseen, immature mental and physical abilities, as well as the fact that his or her perceptions are not yet that crisp enough to be translated into or to be transferred into anything tangible, maybe because of these discrepancies. So I come across with the explanations of Shriver, how difficult it could be to teach young writers to anticipate the reader's needs, because once they are writing, they are driving a car, let's say, but we should also teach them what about the passengers, or how about the pedestrians, etc., the others' needs, which could be not that much difficult because children are good at having some empathy. This demands a creative process that calls for sophisticated abilities, including the capacity of empathize with others, comprehend their range of emotions, and dream and communicate these emotions to the others. Writing is the most difficult language skill because it's learned last, and we first listen to the others, we then begin to speak, and then we learn how to read, and writing comes at the end. So writing requires some more tolerance on one hand and a learning process on the other hand. However, writing imparts the capacity to perceive and comprehend through the eyes of the others, because you are writing on your own. That's why we might be discussing the reader-oriented evaluation. Who's reading it? How do they understand it? How do they like it? Do they like it or not? And they assess the impact of the author's work on the reader. And there might also be an author-oriented approach, that what do they understand from each other and from the written words, and then it's my idea, I get it in this way, perhaps the author didn't like it, but I liked it, etc. So we tried both approaches in our study. New mass media platforms provide models of new expectations, lifestyles, and methods of production, consumption, and action for individuals and communities. People and society are absorbing the function and content of those models with truly understanding that they are eating it, they are consuming it, because these examples are provided so rapidly and eclectically. So what's common would be your own agenda as well. They modify their habits, they internalize, and they change their actions and even thoughts to get along with the others in the society. So children are immediately exposed to kind of a forced communication application before they never understand what communication is. Because of this, their communication skills replace practical life skills. They easily decide whether they like it or not. But once they spend some time with their written words, or once they had the hat of the editor of their friends' written tasks, so they have some kind of consciousness, or they raise their awareness for this matter. It's critical to cultivate an appreciation of writing in people starting from an early age, to help them to become producers rather than just consumers. Otherwise, they would be just consuming the other's words, the other structures, the other stylistic tastes, etc. So this study is really very important, in my opinion, because it tries to assess the previous research on primary school students and their creative writing, and how youngsters internalize heroic figures, and the concept of hero and heroism were questioned within the scope of this story. Because the hero, who is your hero, the child will be writing about their heroes, their daily life, their family members, etc. So they are making somebody the actor of their written words. And their creative writings, the way the hero characters exposed to them via the media, were compared and contrasted. Are they following the rules that the media is exposed to them, or are they creating their own heroes? This was our main question. So we asked them at the very beginning, what makes this moment, this emotion, or this image, or this story so important? Is it original? Did you get it? How can you believe that it's original if it's not copied from a friend or another title, the news you saw on the newspaper, etc.? Is it referring to past, present, or future? Because children are able to move their mood from one to another very easily. And it's highly related with the environment, and the social group impact is huge. I remember a class, the whole class was writing about a fire. And I asked, what happened in this classroom? Was there a fire in the last month? And yes, they've never seen the fire. They've heard about their families, of their friends, and there was a fire in their house, and everyone was somehow had a kind of an impact of this fire. So memories, whose memories, dreams of futures, or hopes, whose hopes, or whose dreams, whose story it is, whose voice it is. Is it originally the student who is writing or telling us the story, or is it somebody he is intending to be? We talked about identity, creativity, and alienation. Alienation is important here because it's very sorry to hear that most of the kids are alienated in the society. They are sitting in the same classroom, but they don't believe that they have friends. They share their knowledge or opinion with their kids, with their classmates, but they don't think that they are real friends. And this feeling is increasing, especially with the migration issues, with the economy, with the disadvantaged areas, with the disadvantaged kids, etc. So we will be concentrating on the evaluation part mainly, rather than the identity or creativity or alienation part. But what we can get out of their written work, is there a kind of an individual happiness or social acceptance? Do we have heroes there, real heroes, or are they made up heroes? Do we have happiness versus unhappiness? Extraordinary images versus reality? Extraordinary images means Batman, Superman, the heroes having extra skills and to save the world and the others. And are they native or non-native? So here are the results. Happiness versus unhappiness. We work with two groups. The younger group established was between 7 and 10 years old, and the older group was between 10 and 14 years old. So we divided the class into the students into two classes. The older groups are unhappy, almost 30%. Unhappiness we've witnessed in their written forms. The younger groups are also unhappy. We cannot say that we were expecting that 100% happiness, all stories are happily ended, etc. But we didn't expect that much sorrow in their written work, or sufferings, or sadness, etc. So it was interesting for us. And what could be the problem is that they are encountering with so many sad items in life, in real life, in their classes, and through the news or media, we might say, so that it's somehow reflected. So people are suffering in their written forms. This was important. And sometimes the stories from the media is jumping into their notebook. Sometimes it's just their imagination, but the happiness and unhappiness, a contradiction was there. We noticed that. The second thing we noticed was the extraordinary versus reality. For the younger group, since their creativity is much more higher than the older ones, native ones, this is not the extraordinary versus reality. The words would be changing only. Extraordinary, 11% for the older group. and reality was 89%. And for the younger group, it's the same. Non-native would be reality. And we also had some happy endings in stories, but these happy endings are not happening with the help of the people, with mutual understanding or agreement, etc. Something extraordinary happens, a miracle occurs, and then the happiness arrives. So it was important because not real people make happiness, and this was very important. When we look at the stories, extraordinary images and the other things are taking much more time and energy, and it's fascinating that 39% of the unhappy endings in children's stories involve superhuman abilities. 61% of the stories with happy endings after many negative events depict a realistic world. So they are happy, but they've lived all these sorrows, etc. So taking into account younger people percentage of happiness attained by the use of extraordinary powers rises to 85%, while the percentage of realism stays at 15% only. So they are not that much realistic. They are expecting some superpowers to intermingle with their settings and then make them happy. This rate becomes 93% for amazing powers and 7% for realism after peer editing. We gave them chances to read each other's works, and we established peers, and after the peer correction or peer editing, we asked them to rewrite their stories, and then whatever changed is changed, and then we can see the first draft and the final draft, and we can notice the difference between the two. And reading youngsters in the most recent storylines, the percentage of scenarios where happiness is attained through extraordinary capabilities rises 39%, while the percentage of realistic circumstances falls to 61%. However, after peer review, the unhappiness rate is just 10%, and despite the lack of extraordinary powers, etc. So this illustrates the possibility of learning, teaching, attempting, and experiencing the concept of happiness and the extraordinary versus reality distinction, since it's evident that the happiness rates have ever grown after the peer reviews. One could argue that this is also attainable, so they are learning to be happy or to make the others happy, even if the others are the heroes in their stories. Once we get back to our native and non-native issue, how they call their heroes and where does the setting take place. So in the older group, only 11% was native and 89% was non-native, because it was really very interesting that Angela, John, Adam, etc., the names were in other languages, the settings were New York, Paris, or in an unknown town, etc., but not here in Turkey or in their area. So I think it was a way of escaping from reality, because once they name their characters in different words, in different ways, they might be easily feel like them. It's a way of making the setting ready for themselves to develop their writing. So when it comes to non-native versus native contradiction, the heroes in the narratives for the older students group made up of 11 local and 89 foreign heroes, and when the stories have peer editing, the rate goes up to 48% local and 52% foreign heroes overall. So editing here plays an important role. This means that their peer suggestions, peer editing, and sharing their stories with someone they trust makes them create perhaps in a different way, and they could even change the names or settings as well. So this presents us a world when an average between the subject and control groups, there are 32% local heroes and 68% foreign heroes. This is highly unexpected in our case, as it nearly matches the percentage of the foreigners and locals in the 250 stories that elementary students wrote. So all the school was writing, and they were promised to have their books in their hands, and they are happy that they get it. In conclusion, what could be said is enormous, actually, but I try to put it into 5 settings. Children's imaginations of local heroes offer them a valuable resource for feeling strong and safe. A child living in a world full of foreign heroes' images can believe that he will never be able to fully develop himself, and that authority and support could come from somewhere else, entirely different, so they don't have trust in themselves. Similarly, the situation becomes even more dangerous if it's the outcome, the results from impersonal impotence or powerlessness and projections like, it happened to him, not to me. And this kind of alienation occurs, so-called heroes gain more importance than their own self. So they are always constantly degrading themselves and worrying about the others or caring more about the others. In conclusion, kids grasp the heroes that the media presents to them, imitating their actions and approaches and to real world issues. It's not something new. It was perhaps the same issue and the same results from the very beginning, but this is the first time that we've seen it in such a bulk situation, because 250 students, the whole school, and they are repeating the same thing in front of us, and it was somewhat really very important to us. So the existence of human heroes in the stories will be forever there, and in their abilities, they will be writing in different ways. Sometimes they would prefer to have a good hero, sometimes the evil hero, but at the end, it will be their written form, it would be their product, it would be their work of art. If they could make it better, and if they can create somewhat original, it would be a pleasure. So particularly younger group narratives, the use of traditional rhymes at the beginning and end of the tale is another important clue that we come across. They were as if reading it out loud to a little child, or telling stories to somewhat younger siblings, etc. We got the impression in that way, but we liked it because it was the traditional way of storytelling, but they put it into the written words. The fact that the youngers include genuine human feelings in their narratives was another important point. Even if their stories tend to be overshadowed by some extraordinary powers, the notion that some happy endings could occur in spite of numerous setbacks or fatalities indicates that pessimistic outlook on the future. The stories make remarkable use of material elements, that money, richness, beauty, power, such things are very important in their sense. Strong heroes never overlook tangible values, even in strange settings and circumstances. So their humanity stays same wherever they produce the setting for their story. So every chance one gets, it seems to underline that heroes can also be regular people. Sometimes they don't do anything extraordinary, no magic, no superpowers, etc. And this was also very important for us. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you like our research. It's a tiny little one, but it was important to us, and that's why I just wanted to share it.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And now I invite you for a short coffee break, 10-minute coffee break. See you soon.